Today, we have a fascinating man, an interesting man, and someone who's really shaped modern Jewish history. Ari Sacher grew up in Binghamton, New York, upstate New York. He made Aliyah, and ultimately he became one of the leaders of Rifael. Now, for those who don't know the name Rifael, obviously, Rifael is what they call the angel of healing, what we call medicine, so to speak, the providential component of medicine. But Rifael is what? It's a defense firm in Israel that has produced one of the great modern miracles called Iron Dome. In the aftermath of what was a huge attack in 2006 of rockets coming from southern Lebanon by Hezbollah, in literally a period of a couple of years, there were a group of people who did not sleep, did not eat, essentially sacrificed their families, and developed the missile defense system known as Iron Dome. That led, of course, to a joint program with America that produced David Sling. And in context, in the same time, led to a program known as the Arrow Missile Defense System. So that system of Iron Dome, David Sling, and the Arrow is literally what has saved not thousands, but tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Israeli lives, of other lives all across the world. And that system took an incredible amount of funding, the cost of each and every rocket, the cost of the system. And much of that funding came from the United States Senate and the United States Congress, whether it was the foreign aid bill, whether it was appropriations from the Armed Services Committee, as well as being an engineer, as well as being a man of science. Ari Sacher is the one, when a senator came, when a congressman came, when someone from the administration came, when someone from the Defense Department, the State Department, who was the one that ultimately shared with them the system, how it works, the importance of it, the significance of it. Ari became a diplomat. Ari became the face of Iron Dome to the ones who ultimately would fund it over the course now of more than 2 decades. He is a gem of a person. He's a gem of a man. And it's a real pleasure for us to welcome and to have the honor to learn from and have a conversation with Ari Sacher.
Thanks, Steve, for having me on board. Things have been quite busy in this part of the world, and specifically in this part of the country. I live in the north of the country in a place called Moreshet. People that are living in the center of the country, and I can verify this because I was there yesterday, might not be aware that there is a war going on in the north of the country, because we in the north were being bombarded by salvos from Hezbollah. And this is actually a weekend Hezbollah, because over the last week, and even more than that, the IDF has been whittling down to a very, so that Hezbollah has a very, very small extent of what it had before. And they're firing rockets at us. And in the center of the country, you're unlimited to how many people can meet, how many people can go to school, how many people can go to synagogue. In the north, we're much more constrained. My daughter, who's in grade 12, she learns in Tiberias. She hasn't been to school yet this year. Between COVID and this business over here since October the 7th, my daughter is going to finish grade 12 with a grade 8 education. It's very, very tenuous living up here because we're being bombarded on a daily basis. And I thought that my little town of Moreshet was immune to this. We would wake up regularly over the past couple of weeks, 2 or 3 times a night, listening to the interceptions over the surrounding communities. And when you hear an interception, you're not only hearing an Iron Dome go boom, but you're also hearing the explosion of the warhead of this bad boy who's being fired, and his warhead is much larger than the Iron Dome. So you hear very loud that will rattle, does rattle our windows, does rattle our houses, and we wake up in the middle of the night and say, "Oh man, they're not letting us sleep," and it's a very strange feeling watching your the neighboring towns under fire. But at least they didn't aim for Moreshet until Sunday. And they aimed for Moreshet. I don't think they aimed for Moreshet. I think they aimed for a nearby place called Rafael, that Rabbi Weil was talking about. It's only about 3-5 miles down the road. And they missed, because they always miss, because what they're firing at us, it's very, very difficult to aim. It goes up, it goes down, it goes boom, and that's terror for you. So if it hits Rafael, that's great. And if it doesn't, even better. And two of these rockets, actually three of them, landed in Moreshet with Iron Dome protecting us. Iron Dome doesn't work 100% of the time. Iron Dome works between 90 and 95% of the time. And if they're firing off a couple hundred rockets a day, so each 100 rockets they fire at us, 5 to 10 are going to fall, and we can't stop it. And one of these rockets hit a house in front of the house. Houses about three doors down. The houses were engulfed in flame and smoke and everything. And I saw from the synagogue, I was looking at the houses, and there's no way in the world people are coming out of here alive. And thank God, everybody came out alive. It's very, very strange. There was another rocket that fell on the next street, about, 50 feet over. And again, there were cars that were blasted over a 6-foot fence. The cars went boom over the fence, and they fell on their roofs in my neighbor's lawn. They're still there because no one really has any idea how to get them out of there, because these are not things that people are typically, oh, can you please erase a burnt car from a yard, which without tearing down the fence, because if you tear down the fence and you tear up the road, and that's where we are. And today I was walking home from synagogue, and I heard the lovely sound of Iron Dome intercept, but I knew it was over Haifa. And I looked out on the walking home from synagogue, and I took this nice picture of my house over here and 8 puffs of smoke up there. And each puff of smoke, by the way, is about $100,000. So they're coming home from shul. We put away $1 million. I've told my daughter that the time is long gone since you're paying for this war. Your children are going to be paying for this war. Potentially her grandchildren are going to be paying for this war. Iron Dome is not the only system that's doing the work. There's another system out there, which Rabbi Weil mentioned, David Sling. It's another system that I work. Actually, I had more to do with David Sling than I did with Iron Dome. And I managed this company that was working with us, a small U.S. company called Raytheon. Perhaps you've heard of them. If you haven't, look it up. And what Iron Dome can do, so we have this layered missile defense in Hebrew, and each system handles its own threat set. And the longer the rocket travels to get here, the more difficult it is to shoot down. So we try to shoot it down with the least expensive way of shooting it down. So Iron Dome takes care of the stuff that's coming up to about 70 kilometers, or 40 miles. And above and beyond that, we got David Sling. And David Sling is handling the stuff that Hezbollah is firing over Tel Aviv, the center of the country. What the Gazans were firing, the country formerly known as the Gazans, was firing over Jerusalem. David Sling would take that out. And every so often, we have Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 that are not produced by Rafael. They're produced by Israel Aircraft Industries. And those are for longer range targets. So when this morning, our friends from Yemen, apparently we did not take out enough of Yemen when we blew up Hudaydah about a month ago or a month and a half ago. They are still there. Don't forget about us. They fired a rocket off at Tel Aviv, and we took that out with a Arrow 2 interceptor. We are protected, but each one of these interceptions is extremely expensive. And Iron Dome, I'm glad the way we're using Iron Dome now, because until last week or a week before, Iron Dome we'd say, bring it on, baby, bring it on. We can shoot you down. And while we shot them down, we did not impose our will on the enemy. And they just kept on firing until we raised the ante. We blew up the beepers. We took out a large number of high-ranking Hezbollah operatives, and we've been blowing the living daylights out of Lebanon now. And what leaks in Iron Dome takes out, and that was my pride and joy when I was briefing Iron Dome in 2011. I said, no, we're not going to base our defense strategy on Iron Dome. We're going to win this war. Whatever leaks through Iron Dome is going to take out. And we're going to impose our will on the enemy. We got very, very used to living being fired on. We are what I refer to as addicted to defense. And it's only recently that the IDF and the government has decided that we need to win this war. We cannot continue living with 70,000 Israelis evicted from what has become a de facto security zone in the north 5 miles of the country. Can't do that anymore. And we're going down that path. Iron Dome and David Sling and Aero Systems are keeping us safe, and we are taking apart what we let fester for 20 years, similar to what we did in Gaza. It's a bit more difficult here because Hezbollah is a more powerful and better trained organization. Hezbollah also has what Gaza does not have, and that is a land bridge to Iran. All of the weapons that they got in Hezbollah, these are not made in Lebanon. The only thing that's made in Lebanon is baklava that you can buy on the street in Beirut. Apparently, it's quite tasty. I don't know. It's not certified by a rabbi. But you can bring in arms, very complex arms, long-range rockets, cruise missiles from Iran through Syria into Lebanon. And it's very, very difficult to stop. And what we have let fester is coming back to bite us. And we've recently taken a step to do away with it. More power to us. And that's my summary, Rabbi Weil, what's going on.
If I could ask you to, and this may not be something you can discuss publicly, but we've always been under the assumption Gaza had, let's say, 40,000 rockets between Hamas and PIJ, not the most sophisticated rockets. Iron Dome, David Sling was in a position to take those down to defend Israel.
Right.
Hezbollah, that you and I could swear to, had 150,000 rockets, maybe more like 170 to 180,000 rockets. I don't know how many of those have been taken out in the last couple of weeks. But let's say, needless to say, let's assume there's at least 120,000 rockets still in the hands of the Hezbollah. Maybe there's more, maybe there's less. Is Israel in a position, if there was a full-fledged war and Hezbollah used, shooting morning, night, and day, is Israel at this point able to defend itself? Or would the missile defense system with that many rockets be way overwhelmed? And unfortunately, there would be massive strikes on the home front. If you could talk to that issue, it's an issue, to put it mildly, that I think keeps all of us awake at night.
Keeps me awake at night too. And look, the number of weapons Hezbollah has is one parameter. The second parameter, probably the most important parameter, the long pole in the tent, is how many of these bad boys Hezbollah can fire. Because in order to launch one of these weapons, you need to be able to put it on a launcher. And one of the things that we have been taking out, we started taking out on August the 25th, when we had our preemptive strike, is their launch capability. And you see time and time again on TV or on I get my news from Telegram. You see these videos again and again, how we have been taking out launchers. So it's like having a whole cupboard full of walnuts, but not having a nutcracker. The walnuts are just going to remain in the cupboard. They're not going to be effective. And the idea is, if we can take out enough of these launchers, we can reduce the amount of bad boys they can have in the air simultaneously, increase the amount. What happens, by the way, is each time they fire at us, we take out another launcher. We always read about this. We close the loop in a matter of minutes because we know where the bad boy is going to land. So we just work backwards. We know where he took off from, when it was launched from. We find it, we take them out. It's almost every time they fire at us. I mean, they're losing launchers, and they're also losing launchers by our attacks in southern Lebanon. I do not think that, as opposed to what I thought only a few months ago, that Hezbollah can overwhelm us anymore. It's not a question of overwhelming us with I don't know, there's so many bad boys in the air, I'm so confused. No, we're not there. We're at a point that we need, for every bad boy, we need an interceptor. And if they fire 2,000 bad boys at us, we only got 1,000 interceptors ready to be launched at one time, then that's a big problem. I do not think they have that capability anymore. I think that capability is waning as we speak. Now, am I going to put I'm going to bet on it? No. But am I confident? Yes.
You mentioned that almost all of the significant rockets are being produced in Iran, coming in through Syria into Lebanon. How about the rocket launchers? Are those produced domestically by Hezbollah in Lebanon, or those are imported as well?
Most of them are, you have these mobile ones. Those are, in order to launch a rocket, it's not a simple question of saying, "Allahu Akbar," one of these Acme launchers that the Wile E. Coyote had at the end of. That's not the way it works. There's certain sophisticated electronics. So some of this could be ported to Hezbollah. One of the things that we're doing is we're trying to destroy the milling facilities in which they make any kind of rocketry or launchers in Lebanon. Yes, there's a problem. We had the same problem in Gaza, by the way. We kept on taking out their rockets, their rocket making facilities. Most of them are underground. And once we sealed off the border with Rafah, there's no way to get anything else in there. They're stuck. I mean, they got what they got and they'll use it, and that's it, which is why I'm much more confident, well, what's going on in Gaza. I believe we have won that war. I think we're afraid to stand up and admit it because that will require a certain amount of responsibility. Well, if you've won the war, what are you going to do tomorrow? We've been very, very hesitant for reasons that I'm not certain I understand as to explain what we're going to do on the day after. The day after is already today, but we're not saying that. So we're kicking that can down the road. In Lebanon, they still have this land border. And what you see happening is every so often you see strikes on the border between Syria and Lebanon. We're not going to strike in Syria unless we absolutely positively have to, but we are striking every so often in Syria and a lot of strikes on the border. They're trying to bring stuff in. They're trying to rearm. We're not trying not to let that happen. Much more difficult than in Gaza.
In terms of the sophistication of the Hezbollah rockets, so what we've been told, and I'd like you, please, if you could clarify it, that most of their rockets have a range of about 40 kilometers. If you push them north of the Litani River, most of those rockets then don't necessarily reach Israel. However, they have precision-guided missiles, they have cruise missiles, they have ballistic missiles, they have other types of Iranian missiles that really could hit any place, any location in Israel. Can you elaborate in terms of the missile power, the weapon power that they have, and maybe go into it a little deeper?
And there's something called the power law. And the power law is you look at a graph that starts high and then it goes low and then it straightens out. So look at how many missiles they have given the range that they have. The short range missiles or rockets they have lots of. The more you extend the range, there's a very quick drop, such that the longest range ones they have very precious few of. Moving them north of Litani is not only to render impotent their extremely short-range rockets. And by the way, the fact that they have Katyushas that go 20 or 40 kilometers, that's not what is preventing the Israelis from going back home. What is preventing the Israelis from going back home is a combination of very short-range rockets that they have. What they've done is they've taken barrel bombs that they use so effectively in Syria, and they stripped a rocket motor at the bottom. It's called a Burkan, which means hurricane. Quite a large warhead. They in certain cases they have 500 kilo of TNT, and that goes up and it goes down. It's completely impossible to know where it's going to go, but the amount of damage that it does, it has a range of about 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers. The amount of damage that it does is horrific. Some of these things have the equivalent of what's called fuel air explosives, thermobaric, which means they suck the oxygen out of the air, so you can have people that are in bomb shelters, and one thing will explode by a bomb shelter, and they'll all die of suffocation. Hospital in the bomb shelter. That's one thing we got to clear away from the border. The next thing we have to clear away from the border is their capability to fire anti-tank weapons. Their major anti-tank weapons, cornets, and something called Almas, which is an Iranian replica of a missile that I've been working on over the last 5 years or so, called Spike. Precision guided. It flies about 4 kilometers, say 2.5 miles. The operator sees what the missile sees. The missile's connected to the operator by the gunner, let's call him, is much cooler. Select the gunner with fiber optic cable, and this thing flies and it sees the target. You lock on the target, and it simply doesn't miss. Well, they've taken one of these missiles that we left in Lebanon in one of our previous times, and we were apparently we did not have the time or availability to bring the thing back to Israel. It went to Iran. They tore it down. They built it back up. And these have been doing a lot of damage also. These have a range of 7 and up to maybe 10 kilometers. If we move them back over the Litani, then they will not be able to use those anti-tank weapons. They will not be able to use Burkans. And the most critical problem is another October the 7th. There is always the threat of a mass incursion of Hezbollah Radwan. Fighter Radwan is their special ops commandos. Yeah, we're afraid of those guys coming over. And the problem is we're afraid that there's that just like in Gaza, while there may not be tunnels that are going under the border, there are tunnels going up to the border. And all of a sudden, a couple thousand of these guys show up flooding out of tunnels, and then they break over the border. You're in the same problem we had on October the 7th. We need to protect against that. And these are the 3 reasons we have to push them above the Litani. The Litani is not only a line in the ground, the Litani is a natural barrier. It is water. It is banks going down and banks coming up. If they're on the other side, it will be extremely difficult for them to bring equipment on the other side of the Litani. It will be impossible for them to fire anti-tank weapons into Israel until they get the longer range version, which is only a certain amount of time. And it'll be impossible for them to fire Burkans. They can fire Burkans on the other side of the Litani, but there's not going to be a lot of people over there, and we can bring those 70,000 people back home. But there is a certain point that you're making that is an excellent point. Is it sufficient for us to push them over the Litani? Because they're just going to rearm, and they're going to start attacking us again. Which is why that there are a lot of people that live in the north, a lot of people that have high-ranking people in the IDF and politicians that believe that without destroying Hezbollah, and Hezbollah can be destroyed the same way Hamas was destroyed. He said that couldn't be done. We did it. We're going to destroy Hezbollah. We can do that as well. And we actually have a much easier time of destroying Hezbollah because they're not these straggler fighters that are in these towns and hiding. These guys are well-trained forces, well-trained army forces. And when they stop being well-trained army forces, then we will, for the purpose of this discussion, have won that war also. The idea is to get them down to an unorganized army when they are fighting, when it's chaotic, when there's no communication. And right now there ain't no communication either. Wasn't that cool? We took away their pagers, so they got to use walkie-talkies. We took away the walkie-talkies, so they got to speak face to face. And then we got all these big shots in the building speaking face to face, and we took out the building. I mean, that is amazing, amazing strategy. So yeah, they're on the run. Question is, do we keep them on the run? I certainly hope so.
Could you share with us a little bit of geography? Now, we hear in the news that there's a significant concentration of the Shia Hezbollah in the Bekaa Valley. We hear there's a significant concentration of the Shia Hezbollah in south of the Litani River. We hear that there's a significant concentration of the Shia Hezbollah in certain neighborhoods, Dakhia in Beirut. For the sake of our listeners, give us a little bit of the geographical lesson about where their concentrations are and where, I mean, the rockets we know are coming from throughout the length and breadth of Lebanon, but where are they in terms of their concentration? And
the rockets are coming from predominantly Shia enclaves. Lebanon is divided into essentially 3 players. You have the Christians, Maronite Christians typically, some other Christians as well. You have Sunni Muslims and you have Shia Muslims. The only countries that have made peace with Israel are what's called moderate Sunni Muslims. There are Sunnis out there that are not moderate, such as Hamas, but at this point in time, the only moderate Muslims are the Sunnis. So you have Hezbollah, which is essentially the Shiites, and they are ensconced in the southern part of Lebanon, and then a bit of a patchwork quilt all the way around Lebanon. The Christians are more to the north, and the Sunnis are also in a patchwork quilt. And there is no love lost between the Sunnis and Hezbollah. I just saw a clip yesterday in which there are hundreds of thousands of people that are leaving large towns like Tzor and Sidon and even Beirut and moving north because they don't want to be in an area which is under fire, which is good because we're telling them get out of there. And what happens in this clip is that these cars are pulling up into Tripoli, and Tripoli is a Sunni enclave, a large city in the north of Lebanon near the Syrian border, and it's a large city, and it's essentially Sunni Muslims. You saw the Sunni Muslim people. The cars were coming in. The Shiites had pictures of Hezbollah flags and Hassan Nasrallah, the chief executive officer of Hezbollah, and you saw people stopping these cars, opening the doors, pulling the people out, and telling them to tear off those flags and telling them to tear down the pictures of Hassan Nasrallah because he's not our guy, and he is wreaking destruction on Lebanon. That's the problem with Lebanon. I would love to be able to find some way to foment revolt in Lebanon. That's what nearly happened in 2009 in Iran. Unfortunately, the Obama administration did not support the Green Revolt that was going, revolution that was going on at the time in Iran. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to do the same thing in Lebanon? I do not think that that is a possibility because what concerns Israel right now are the population in the southern part of Lebanon, just north of the border, and those guys are all Hezbollah. They're all Shiite Muslims. There's no one who's going to stand up and tell Nasrallah, no, you can't do that anymore. There's no one who's going to take the law into his own hands, or he'll be destroyed, he'll be killed. The only people that can do that are living in enclaves that are really not under fire. So there was an idea in Naftali Bennett, it was one of his ideas that Lebanon equals Hezbollah, that if Hezbollah does something, then Israel has every right to attack Lebanon. The problem is that 2/3 of the Lebanese are not even part of this war. It's much more difficult to be able to isolate Hezbollah and take out Hezbollah, because taking out everybody else in Lebanon is just a waste of time.
In the north of Israel, the communities that were evacuated last October, we've got, refugees, we've got the whole northern part of the country, which is Yud and Rai. Many of those communities, if they were to go back, there's no houses to go back to because Hezbollah has been destroying communities, destroying neighborhoods. That's not something that we see in the American press, unfortunately. It's not focused on. If I could look into southern Lebanon, is a consequence of these Shia Hezbollah towns in southern Lebanon, close to the Israeli border. Have we been doing structural damage there in order maybe to prevent them from coming back? Right now, they've evacuated. The Shia Muslims of the south have evacuated many of these communities. Are they intact, or is there structural damage there as well?
Yeah, I can speak from secondhand data from my son, who was he was a commander, an officer. He's a captain, and he was on the northern border. And he's told me whatever is on our side, what's going on the other side is tenfold worse. The point that many towns no longer exist. It's not a couple of houses here and there. Many towns no longer exist. They are what's referred to now as kill zones. If anyone goes into that town, then they will be killed, even if they're not carrying any weapons. Why? Because just because you're not carrying a weapon doesn't make you an innocent bystander. The threat is that there are weapons, anti-tank missiles that are still sitting in these houses. So he goes into the house, takes out an anti-tank missile, and starts firing. What we have seen over the last 3 to 4 months is a tremendous drop in the amount of anti-tank fire from southern Lebanon, because they can't reach it anymore, because essentially we have pushed them back to the point that they can't see us anymore. Most of these anti-tank weapons, you need a direct line of sight, especially with the Cornet, which is their most powerful one. If we're pushing you back 4, 5, 6 kilometers, you can't see us anymore, then it's not usable. The only place that anti-tank weapons are still being used is in Metula, which is the northernmost city in Israel. And unfortunately, Metula is sitting in a valley which is surrounded by ridges, and people can take pot shots at Metula whenever they want with whatever anti-tank weapons they have. They have not yet left there. We will move our people back eventually. We will have to rebuild. We won't have to do the kind of rebuilding that they're doing in the Gaza envelope. There will be rebuilding there, but we need to get these people back. I think if they go back now, they will be infinitely safer than they were before. But we need to increase the distance until we can, between us and the Hezbollah, before we can bring them back, and that will happen very shortly.
Just for those who are participating, and Ari, if I'm saying something wrong, please correct me. Of the more than 50 people, half of them were soldiers, half of them were civilians that have been killed by Hezbollah in this war on the northern front. That number is wrong because it doesn't include the 12 children. It is many more than 50. But of the 70 to 80 people who have been killed, most of them have been killed by these Russian Kornet. They're called an anti-tank missile. They don't have a trajectory. It's not something that Iron Dome can shoot down. It's like Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. It's just straight, no trajectory. And what happens is there's no way of defending against something like that. And that's killed tens and tens of Israelis, both civilians and soldiers. And what Ari, what you're teaching us now, what you're explaining to us, is the fact that we've been able to clear out those communities, those Shia communities sitting near our border. That's actually saving lives. Absolutely.
It's saving lives. Yeah, I mean, one of the first weeks of the war, my nephew was on Friday night. He's also a captain in the infantry, and he was leading a small group of people that were going to camp out and prevent any kind of Hezbollah onslaught. They just finished making Kiddush on Friday night, and they moved so they could be behind a boulder, and a Kornet missile was fired at him. It injured him, and it killed the guy who was standing 5 feet behind him. It's an American from Maryland who had just gone back because he wanted to fight in the war. This is not happening anymore. What is happening now, they're still able to use those small drones, very small drones that have a very, very small amount of explosives in it, and they fire those, and they're very, very easy to get through because they fly low and they disguise themselves among the terrain. And Iron Dome's problem is not shooting them down, and Iron Dome's problem is finding them, and that's what's still doing damage. Obviously now they're more into the rockets. There's a story my son told me. The day my son got out of the Army for the second time, it was in the end of May. No, sorry, it was the end of July. That was the first time. It was the end of May, the end of July, and they were going back. His entire division was going back to give back their stuff near Afula in the north of the country, but the center north of the country. And there's a lot of people going back, and not everybody had cars. So what they did was some of the people gave their stuff, loaded it on a truck, and they were going to meet it back there at they would all meet at Naura, which is their base of logistics base. Eliasaph, my son, it was critical to him that he forced his soldiers in 100-degree heat, always wear your flak jacket, because that will one day save your life. Well, one of the guys who was just down the street in a different unit, he gave his flak jacket, put it on the truck that was going back to the base. A drone hit behind him, it blew up. Had he been wearing a flak jacket, he would not have been injured, at least not injured badly, because he wasn't. On the last day of Miluim, of his reserve duty, he got killed by one of those things. Those were problematic until a couple of weeks ago. Hezbollah seems to have upped the ante. They're spending more of their time firing rockets now.
Ari, we want to wish you, everyone in Israel, the community of Moreshet, your son who's defending Israel. We want to wish you, 2 sons, I apologize. We want to wish you really a Shana Tova, Look, we know that what your sons are doing, what you're doing is really at the forefront of humanity. And you're not just defending Israel, you're not just defending the Jewish people. But the way Israel goes is the way the 21st century is going. And unfortunately, the world doesn't appreciate it. The Sunni Muslims do. They know that Israel is ultimately on the front line defending Sunni Islam. But unfortunately, people in Western civilization don't appreciate what Iran is, what this ring of fire is, and what ultimately this means for humanity. They don't get it. You do. You're a man of history. You're a man of vision, and you're a man of science. And we can't thank you enough. What I'm going to ask you to do, if it's something you can do, I'm going to take you away from today, from the war that we're in the midst of. And if you would share with our participants maybe a couple of stories of what your engagements were, what your meetings were with Congress, with senators, because we are talking now over the course of the last, 17, 18 years, we're talking probably billions of dollars that ultimately America has done to support the ability of Israel to not have to have gone to this war until this point, to play defensive. And you've said to me many times, there's no such thing as just being defensive. If you don't have an offense, you'll never win. You can't just play defense. But until now, Israel has done that. They've played defense for 20 years. And that defense has enabled a generation not to have to go to war. Everything changed on October 7th. The world has changed. But in that course of that 20 years, you were on the front line and you played that role. Can you share with us, if it's possible, a number of stories of your meetings, of your discussions, of some of what took place that enabled us to have the kind of funding to defend Israel for these 20 years?
What I discovered was that the folks on Capitol Hill, as stodgy and stuffy as we might assume they might be, they react very, very well to humor. They react to passion, and they react to being told something that they can understand instead of having to have their staffers chew it up and spit it out for them. They want it explained to them by the people who are on the front lines, as you say, explaining it to them. I discovered this on the first day I met with AIPAC. I was working in Iron Dome, lead engineers, and on that day we had a high-ranking group of AIPAC officials that came to visit us. And AIPAC visits us every year or so to see what kind of exciting things we were doing. And this was May of 2011. This is right after Iron Dome became operational. March of 2011, we had our first operational intercept. In April of 2011, everybody wanted to see Iron Dome. So when found out AIPAC was coming, then everybody wanted to brief AIPAC, because we Israelis, we just love Americans. Just a great thing to brief Americans. We rub shoulders with them. We try out our English. We go home and tell our wives, I spoke today with Americans. It was very, very nice. And on this particular day, all of the higher ups at Rafael that could have briefed, that wanted to brief AIPAC, all these guys were at this outdoor training kind of thing, and there was no one left to brief them. And so the call went out, is there anybody here who can brief Iron Dome competently in English? They said yes. So obviously they chose someone else. But on that day, for reasons that are still unclear, that guy was unable to show up at work that day. It was Yehuda. He was unable to be at work that day, so the lot fell on me. And I was given this very, very boring PowerPoint presentation that was written by my boss. He said, you must show this to the Americans. Okay, fine. And the Americans came in, and this day was like the first heat wave of the year. And these poor AIPAC guys had left a hotel in Jerusalem, driven up to the Golan Heights, when it was 100 degrees outside to learn about Israeli military victories. That's people do in the Golan Heights all the time. How do you do it? Simply, you take a bus, you drive it up to a tank, get off the bus, climb up to the tank, which has been sitting in the searing sun for 5 or 6 hours. You hear the story of the tank, you get off the tank, you go back to the bus, leaving large clumps of the bottom of your shoes on the tank. And there's a lot of tanks in the Golan Heights. So when they got to us, they were blitzed. They came into this meeting room and it was full of delicious food and drink, and they wanted nothing of it. They trudged into the meeting room, and every step they took, a cloud of dust just billows skyward. These poor guys, they sit down like this, and they so badly wanted some rapid eye movement sleep, just so that they so richly deserved it too. And in Israel, they're a startup nation. We're not startup nation for naught. I mean, there's reasons. We're told to assess the situation and then to react. So I assessed the situation. I looked to the right and I looked to the left, and there were none of my commanding officers were there. And then I said, should I do it? I'm going to do it. And I looked at the APAC guys and I said, Shalom. And they said to me, Shalom. I said, today I am speak with you about the Iron Dome. The reason I am asking to be speak with you is because much very goodness, I English talking. And I would say all of them had fallen asleep during that brief prelude. I could have gotten up, climbed over the bodies, and left the room. And for all I know, they'd still be there today. But I resisted the urge. I counted to 3, and subsequent experimentation has shown that the proper number is actually 4. And I said to them, do you know how difficult it is for me to speak English like this? And everybody sat up like this. And all of a sudden they realized, hey, you don't need to bore the living daylights out of me to tell me what I need to know. And from that moment on, my first link to this diplomacy business was APAC. And I went everywhere with APAC. I went to all these policy conference and of blessed memory, and all these other conferences. We were there with you, and it worked. It resonated, and they just continued to give and to give and to give. And the congressmen like it when you explain it to them in a way they understand. Make a joke, crack a joke, tell them, make mother-in-law jokes. I do that also. And when I talk to them, and it works, and it works to this day. Most recently, 3 months ago. And indeed, a month ago, I was speaking to what's called the Jewish Economic Forum. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's Avi Yorish has these people that are high hitters, and they work together to find ways that they can help Israel. And one of the guys who was there was John Missner, formerly from APAC, and he was there when I did my shtick the first time. And he said, I need you to do your shtick again. I said, no way. And then he calls over Elias Saratovsky, who was there too. He used to be from Houston, APAC, and I did it for him in front of 1,200 people in 8 U.S. conferences. I need you to do the shtick. We did the shtick, and you see people just all of a sudden looking at their watches, pulling out their mobile phones, and then I move into English. Amazing. That's what they like. That's what goes over, and the U.S. has been extremely, extremely generous. If only they would be as generous with offensive weaponry. But they're going to sick me on the U.S. for offensive weaponry. We're going to get that out of the way too.
Yeah, and that's something you've always, as long as I've known you, you've always said you cannot win a war on defense alone. You have to have a strong offense. In fact, you've always said, like people say in sports, a strong offense is your best defense.
I want to have a good defensive coordinator, a good offensive coordinator. I want to have Pat Mahomes, but I also want to have Micah Parsons on my team also. I got to have both.
Yeah.
But I certainly can't let my D win it, because my D doesn't score any points. My O's got to score the points. That's my message.
Ari, we want to wish you a Ketiva v'chatima tova. We want to wish you and everyone in Israel, and for that matter, we want to wish all of humanity that it should be a year of peace, a year of safety, a year of morality, a year of ethics, a year of decency, a year of justice, something that the world did not see in the past year. And unfortunately, when nations that claim to be moral, that really have a history of being moral, when they can tolerate, and when the truth and when morality is great, you have a sick world. You have an unhealthy world. And in that beacon of light that you represent in Israel, that incredible beacon of light that you represent in terms of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and all those associated with it, are that beacon of light. And please, God should look after them. We should be blessed with a very different year than last year. And I will say, we have a lot to be optimistic about over the last 2 weeks. You've alluded to it in this briefing quite often. But the last 2 weeks have been something that is nothing short of a miracle, nothing short of miraculous in terms of what we've seen and in terms of not eliminating, but limiting the capabilities of Israel's most powerful enemy, the Hezbollah to the north.
My greatest hope is that we have a year of ethical clarity, something that has been sorely missing. Good and evil used to be very easy to tell the difference. One was 1 and 1 was 0. It was binary. It isn't that way anymore. And I pray to God that he gives man the ability to recapture that ethical and moral clarity that we had until not too long ago. That's my message.
Thank you, Ari.